Hi everyone, so this is our last in our series of videos on the human reproduction system, and what we're going to be focusing on in this video is sexually transmitted and blood-borne infections. This is basically, you probably have heard a term STD, where the STD stands for sexually transmitted disease. Well, this is basically just the more detailed acronym for STDs, so it's sexually transmitted and blood-borne infections, because a lot of these infections right here are not just transmitted by sexual intercourse, but is mostly transmitted by the mixing of fluids. So we're going to talk into a little bit more detail here. As you can see, these are the pages that this corresponds to in our workbook. When we are talking about STBBIs, it is an infection that is transmitted during intercourse or through blood-blood contact. So the reason why there's an or is because these STBBIs can be transmitted without having sexual intercourse, but the key thing is that the blood of an infected person is mixed with the blood of an uninfected person. Now, depending on the STBBI, there's a lot of different side effects that can happen from them, but the key commonality between all of them is that it can cause serious health problems. And some of these health problems can be infertility, and infertility again is losing ability to reproduce. And secondary health issues, and again, depending on the STDBI, there's a wide range of secondary health issues, and of course the most damaging health problem, if not treated, can lead to death. Now, depending on the STDBI, there might not be symptoms, so symptoms might not appear, meaning that the person is asymptomatic. So if symptoms don't appear, the individual would be asymptomatic, meaning that they have the infection but there's no symptoms of them, or symptoms can appear days and or weeks after intercourse. Now, obviously, if symptoms appear after a long period of time, then it can be really difficult to figure out when the individual became infected. Now, what's extremely important, and this is what we mentioned when we were talking about contraceptive methods, that condoms, whether we're talking about male condoms or female condoms, are the only way to prevent the spread of STBBIs. And the reason why condoms, again, whether it's male or female condoms, is the only way is because the polyurethane shield basically forms a physical barrier . And this physical barrier prevents fluids from mixing. And when we're talking about fluids, it prevents semen from entering the vagina where these fluids would be mixed. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing the main STBBIs and what are the main symptoms and what are their causes. So all STBBIs are transmitted through unprotected sex, so whether this is oral sex, vaginal sex, or anal sex. So again, the best way to prevent the transmission of STBBIs is when undergoing sexual intercourse to be using condoms. Because again, the condoms, they form a physical barrier. So there are basically 4 key categories of STBBIs. Bacterial, so this is basically STBIs that are caused by a bacteria infection. So again, bacteria is single-celled, S-I-N-G. And with bacterial infections, the way to treat them would be antibiotics. Now, viral infections are STBIs that are transmitted through a virus, Now, viruses are not bacteria, so antibiotics have no effect on viruses. Depending on the virus, there can be vaccines that can prevent the STBI, and there can also be vaccines that don't. So for instance, hepatitis B and HPV, there are vaccines which prevent being infected by these two viruses, but there is no HIV vaccine and there is no herpes vaccine currently. There's lots of research into looking at the development of antivirals to help reduce the symptoms of these viruses, but as of 2022, there is no cure for HIV or for herpes. Fungal or yeast infections. So vaginitis and yeast infections are caused by a fungus. So remember when we're talking about fungi in the animal kingdom, things like yeast, things like mushrooms, they're all fungi, obviously different types of fungi. And then parasites. So when we're talking about parasites, we're talking about insects, would be pubic lice and scabies. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about each of these STBBIs. Chlamydia is a bacterial infection, so people mostly don't show symptoms, and if symptoms are arised, it only happens after a few weeks. And this is where it becomes very difficult because you won't necessarily know which partner infected you with chlamydia. It's the most common STBBI among young individuals, so 15 to 20, and it is more common among women compared to men. So in women, this would affect the cervix. In both women and men, it would affect the urethra, and then it can occasionally affect the rectum, throat, and eyes. So transmission happens between unprotected oral, vaginal, or anal sex. And what's particularly important about chlamydia is that the infection can pass from mother to infant during childbirth. And why? Because the affected area, being the cervix, the child would basically, during childbirth, go through the cervix. So if this is not treated, chlamydia can be passed on to the infant. The main symptom would be pain while urinating, but then again, some people do not show symptoms of chlamydia. Our next STBBI, which is also a bacterial infection, is gonorrhea. It is the second most common bacterial STBBI, and its increasity is on the rise in Canada. It is also treated with antibiotics, and serious complications can arise if left untreated. So all STBBIs, whether we're talking about bacterial or fungal or parasitic, the longer it is left untreated, the more serious the complications happen. For gonorrhea, unlike chlamydia, mostly men develop symptoms, not women usually, and these symptoms actually happen much quicker than they do in chlamydia. So in gonorrhea, symptoms develop 2 to 7 days after the infection. Again, the transmission is very similar to that of chlamydia, that it is transmitted through unprotected oral, vaginal, anal sex. And just like in chlamydia, gonorrhea can be passed from infected mothers to infants during childbirth. And symptoms, itchiness, pain in the genital area, and mucus discharge. So the last of the bacterial infections that we're going to be talking about is syphilis. Now, syphilis is uncommon in Canada, but there is an increase in syphilis being seen. Now, just like the other two, it can be treated with antibiotics. However, unlike the other two, if it is left untreated, it can have life-altering complications. And when we're talking about life-altering complications, if left untreated, you can have damage to the heart, to the nervous system, to blood vessels, to eyesight, which can lead to heart difficulties and blindness, just to name a few. Like the other two, so like gonorrhea and chlamydia, transmission can be spread through unprotected sex, also can be passed from an infected mother to infant during childbirth, but also it can be spread through contact with syphilitic sores or rashes, which is unlike the other two. There are multiple different symptoms, and each stage of syphilis has its own set of symptoms. And what's extremely important that if left untreated, the symptoms become more and more grave. However, the key symptoms are painless sores. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go on and discuss the STBBIs that are due to a viral infection. So the first and probably the most well-known STBBI that has a viral infection would be AIDS. Now, AIDS is actually caused by the HIV virus. A is basically the disease that develops due to the HIV virus. Now, AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Disorder, and it's caused by the HIV virus. And basically what the HIV virus does is that it destroys the immune system. Meaning that people who die from the HIV virus don't actually die from HIV, but they die from things like the common cold or pneumonia because their immune system is completely destroyed. Now, there is no cure for HIV. However, there are lots of treatments that can slow down the progression of the virus. And there's been lots of research that's happened within the HIV virus in the past 20 to 30 years. So life expectancy of those individuals have increased drastically. Now, with AIDS, just like all the other ones, the transmission is through unprotected sex, but it can also be transmitted through shared and or non-sterile needles, organs, or blood transfusions, and it can be transmitted during pregnancy. And the key thing is that because AIDS, as it's being a virus and a virus that is found within the bloodstream, that all of this can be transmitted by the mixing of blood. Now, the transfusions prior to 1985 is because that's when the very large boom of the AIDS pandemic and became more mainstream that something was happening, and scientists realized that the the HIV virus was found within the bloodstream. So before 1985, when organs or blood was donated, it wasn't being tested for the HIV virus. So people who donated blood who were unaware of being infected with the HIV virus when that blood was given into a recipient would also catch the HIV virus. Now, when blood is being donated, blood banks test for a variety of viruses to make sure that this doesn't happen. Hepatitis B is another STBBI. And this is a viral infection that actually attacks the liver. And the liver is actually one of the key organs which is necessary for producing enzymes to break down different foods and to break down different molecules. So hepatitis B is treatable, but it can lead to chronic liver disease, jaundice. And jaundice is when you have a yellowing of the skin, which is basically indication that you're having liver issues and or liver cancer. Genital herpes is the last of our viral infection. There is no cure for genital herpes, and genital herpes causes sores or fever blisters. Herpes can actually spread from the mouth to the genital organs and vice versa. Individuals that have genital herpes will have outbreaks multiple times a year, and it's during these outbreaks where sores are formed and can be transmitted via the sores, as well as being transmitted via the blood. So with genital herpes, there is a difficulty here. Pubic lice is a parasite, so it lives in the pubic hair of individuals. It is curable with specialized shampoos and medication. The human papilloma virus, HPV, is a viral infection, so it attacks the skin and causes warts. It can lead to cervical or vaginal cancer in women or penile cancer in men. It is treatable but not curable, and there's a lot of vaccines that prevent the contraction of HPV. So vaginitis is an infection, and this is an infection that is caused by fungi. So in women and men, it causes irritation. So in women, it's irritation in the vulva. In men, it's irritation in the penis area, and it's treatable with medication. And yeast infections is one of the few STBBI that occurs only in women. Now, what's really important is that a yeast infection can be caused by things that are not related to intercourse. So you can actually get a yeast infection without having sexual intercourse, and it causes itching and discomfort and mucus discharge of a different color, and it is treatable with medication. There's a lot of resources where you can read up more about on STBBIs. Sexandyou.ca is a very good resource, and on the class website there's also links to other resources about STBBIs. Hope this helps, and have a great day.